whether dead or alive, whether in war or in peace. So a belated Happy Veterans Day to you. And a word about this service. Whether you are celebrating or grieving the results of the recent election, there is no doubt that we have work to do to repair our broken systems and our divided society. Becoming the United States of America again will require re-examining the stories and the myths we tell ourselves about who we are. It is not work for the squeamish, but it must begin now. So as Marcy said, welcome to church today. Our call to worship comes from the Reverend Maureen Kaloran. Welcome, you who come in need of healing, you who are confused or have been betrayed. Welcome with your problems and your pain. Welcome to your joys and your wonderings. Welcome your need to hope, your longing for assurance. Instead of answers, may you find here safety for your questions. Instead of promises, may you find community for your struggles and people with hands and hearts to join you in engaging the challenges and the changes of our days. Let us worship together. Our hymn is Come Build a Land, the first verse.
Bind up the broken, we'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a promised land that can be. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream.
Sounds and Stories with Mr. Zach.
The Thankful Book by Todd Parr. Every day I try to think about the things that I'm thankful for. I'm thankful for my hair because it makes me unique. And I'm thankful for my ears because they let me hear words like I love you. I'm thankful for my garden because I like to watch things grow. And I am thankful for my shadow because it makes me look taller. I'm thankful for bubble baths because they keep me squeaky clean. And I'm thankful for underwear because I like to wear it on my head. I'm thankful for my friends because they make me smile. And I'm thankful for my pets because they keep me warm. I'm thankful for vacations because I get to see new people and places. And I'm thankful for walks because they're special times for just you and me. I'm thankful for hugs because they make me feel good. And I'm thankful for kisses because they make me feel loved. I'm thankful for the holidays because they bring my family together. But most of all, I am thankful for you.
Our meditation today begins with words from Langston Hughes. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. We lift up those in this community who face change, challenge, or loss this day as we hold within our hearts all who suffer. Now we pray each in our own ways into the silence. The hopes of this community are offered forth in the names of all those who've gone before and in the names of all those who will come after. In the names of all the helpers of humankind, Shalom, Salam, Amen, and blessed be. There is a balm in Gilead.
On Friday, November 20th, we pause to remember our transgender brothers and sisters that have been murdered during this year in acts of violence. We honor their memory and continue to work for transgender visibility and equality in our society. According to the Center for Transgender Equality, 28 persons have been murdered in just the first 7 months of this year, surpassing the total of 26 in all of 2019. The epidemic of violence against transgender individuals is particularly pronounced for Black and Latina women. Every day, transgender people face violence, discrimination in safe, affordable housing, economic opportunity, and health care. Many are forced into sex work in order to survive, which creates a dangerous and sometimes fatal result. They are afraid to go to the police when they face violence, and statistics show that they often face violence at the hands of the police that are supposed to protect them. On a Transgender Day of Remembrance, we recognize their right to exist, their right to pursue happiness, to be free to live without fear, and their right to a safe and loving home. We remember their names. Dustin Parker McAllister, Alexa Nulisa Luciano Ruiz, Yampi Mendez Arocho, Monica Diamond, Lexi, Joanna Metzger, Penelope Diaz Ramirez, Leila Palez Sanchez, Serena Angelique Velasquez Ramos, Nina Pop, Haley J. O'Regan, Tony McDade, Dominique Remy Fells, Rhea Milton, Jane Thompson, Selena Reyes Hernandez, Brayla Stone, Mercy Mack, Shaky Peters, Bree Nuke Black, Summer Taylor, Drea McCarty, Tatiana Hall, Marilyn Casares, Tiffany Harris, Keisha D. Hardy, Brian Egypt Powers, and Aja Raquel Roan Spears. May you rest in peace. We will see your transgender brothers and sisters and work for understanding, acceptance, and equality.
On Veterans Day this past Wednesday, November the 11th, I found myself thinking about the National Mall in Washington, D.C. That can be a special and emotional place for Americans with all its outsized monuments to moments in American history. The Washington and Lincoln memorials, of course, that massive World War II memorial, the eerie one to the Korean War with its platoon of sculpted soldiers eternally moving out silently across a field. The place that turned out to be the most special for Linda and me on our visit there years ago was the Vietnam Memorial. A simple V-shaped black granite wall cut into a depression in the ground. We entered at one end and read the name on the first panel. Took a step down the walk to the next panel to read the tens of names there. Down a little more to the hundreds of names, and then the thousands and thousands and thousands, until we found ourselves at the lowest point of the V and realized the only way out involved many, many, many more war dead. We stood together there and cried and saw plenty of others doing the same. If you or your loved ones have ever served in uniform, thank you for your service. Now, maybe you've been to the National Mall more recently, and so you might have visited the newer memorial to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I happened to be there with a group of church leaders, coincidentally, on the day before that memorial was to be dedicated back in 2011. For Dr. King to be there near Washington and Jefferson and Lincoln and the war heroes of our numerous overseas conflicts, it just seems right to a lot of us Americans. The day I was there, I was struck by the abundance of quotes from Dr. King carved into the walls of the entry to the memorial. I was especially excited to see his Arc of the Universe bends towards justice, which you may remember King borrowed from Theodore Parker, the firebrand Unitarian minister and abolitionist of the mid-19th century. But I also saw, etched into the side of the rock from which Dr. King's image emerges, a much stranger quote. I was a drum major for justice, peace, and righteousness. Oddly self-referential. Now, this paraphrase of words from one of King's last sermons had been taken completely out of context. It's clear in that sermon that he was being dismissive of those who crave public recognition. I'll say that again. He was being dismissive of those who crave public recognition when he said, if you want to say that I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. I was a drum major for righteousness. And all of the other shallow things won't matter. Ironic, then, that this quote would end up written in stone on the National Mall. Here's the thing, though. The story doesn't end there. After a flood of complaints, that errant quote was removed a couple of years later. Which gets me to thinking, if quotes that have been etched in stone can somehow be changed, maybe we can do the same thing with some of our other myths. Now, more mythology. In 2013, a life-size statue was unveiled in Statuary Hall in the Capitol building in Washington, depicting Rosa Parks. It's a bronze casting of her seated and waiting to be arrested after refusing to give up her seat on a Montgomery, Alabama bus to a white man. The way I first heard as a young adult the story of that moment of hers in our national saga was that Ms. Parks had been returning home from work that day and was simply too tired to get up and move to the back of the bus, and so she was arrested. All I've read since then tells me that this was a gloss of the actual facts, and so it was myth-making at work. When her statue was dedicated in 2013, the myth-making continued in full force. President Obama, remember him, said in his remarks that day, "This morning we celebrate a seamstress, slight of stature but mighty in courage. In a single moment, with the simplest of gestures, she helped change America and change the world. And today she takes her rightful place among those who shaped this nation's course." Nice. Remaining seated was a simple gesture. There are only two things about it that are too often missed. First, Parks' refusal to give up her seat was part of a much larger strategy that she had worked very hard on and trained for. It wasn't a momentary whim, as the myth has become, but a courageous and planned act of putting herself on the line for a much larger vision. To suggest that she was impulsive in her behavior is to obscure the fact that after her leadership of the bus boycott, she was fired from her job and had to move her family first to Virginia and then to Michigan in search of jobs for herself and her husband. Imagine that. A national hero having to move around the country trying to find work. Now, secondly, yes, she acted courageously, but she did not act alone. She joined the NAACP in 1943, and she began organizing and working alongside untold numbers of others in the social justice and criminal justice arenas. Ms. Park was instrumental, no doubt, in changing our society for the better, just as the Reverend Dr. King was. But to say that things change because of the courage and strength and persistence of one or two or a few people is to minimize the great work of so many others. Things don't generally change because of one person. Things change because we come together to do the hard work of organizing and educating and following through on our commitments to our neighbors. It is not so often the I that is critical in such huge cultural shifts, but the we. However, let us not get too cocky, because it is that we I just used that can also become problematic. Sometimes you have to admit we had nothing to do with it. More properly, it's they when we're celebrating work done and things changed and justice accomplished. For example, in her book, A More Beautiful and Terrible History, The Uses and Misuses of Civil Rights History, the educator Jean Theoharis mentions President Ronald Reagan's initial strong opposition to the creation of a national holiday in memory of Dr. King. Then, when pressure for it became irresistible, she says, he shifted gears and simply co-opted the idea into his own ideological framework. As he signed the King holiday into law, he asserted that we can take pride in the knowledge that we Americans recognized a grave injustice and took action to correct it. Again, two problems. First, as if King's aspirations had already been attained and nothing more need be done. You have got to be kidding. And then second, we Americans? Didn't he mean those other Americans? As if people like Mr. Reagan had anything to do with reforming systems of racial justice in the world rather than dismantling whatever they could. Now, if you find this too partisan, hold on for just a moment, because Professor Theoharis also writes about the troublingly similar sunniness in President Obama's rhetoric. For instance, during the 2007 campaign, when he declared at the historic Brown Chapel in Selma, Alabama, that the earlier generation of civil rights activists took us 90% of the way there. Did he really think that we were 90% of the way to the promised land? Because from this vantage point, and notwithstanding all the backsliding we've been doing lately, we sure seem to have a long, long way to go. Be that as it may, there is no scarcity of Democrats or Republicans or conservatives or progressives ready to climb on board the freedom train, rhetorically at least. Even those actively working to thwart voting rights and criminal justice reform call on the tropes of the civil rights movement. This form of American triumphalism says that we shall overcome, that yes, we all loved Dr. King and the ideals he stood for. And we all appreciated that sweet little seamstress, Rosa Parks, who kept her seat to shed light on injustice. Well, no, not really. We didn't all love Dr. King when he was alive. He received death threats regularly. His house was bombed with his family inside. J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI ran an extensive file on him. Even his friends wondered at some of his positions. When he came out against the war in Vietnam, many gave up on him. The youngsters in the movement had long since quit believing his theories on nonviolence. A 1966 Gallup poll found that 72% of white Americans had an unfavorable opinion of Dr. King. Now he's been gone 50 years, of course. It's hard to find anyone of any persuasion who will speak against him. In fact, everybody wants to use his words to make themselves sound better. And another thing, it was bad in the American South. That is indisputable. But we often ignore that it was also bad in the North, and bad in the East, and bad in the West as well. While the Watts area of Los Angeles burned in 1965, Governor Edmund Brown said, "California is a state where there is no racial discrimination." Wow. And then it was one William O'Connor, head of the Boston School Committee, who said during the busing crisis, the battle to save neighborhood schools, O'Connor said, "We have no inferior education in our schools. What we've been getting is an inferior type of student." Meaning, of course, well, you know what that means. Now, this wasn't just bad in terms of a little attitude. There were examples of overt racism all over. It's true, Southern white segregationists placed whites-only signs on water fountains and restrooms. It's also true that white officials in the North used selective enforcement of laws against loitering to enforce racial segregation. In the South, white officials painted color lines in the sand of public beaches to exclude people of color. At the same time, in the so-called racially liberal Northeast, towns devised procedures for determining who could access beaches, what they could bring, and what they could do once there, and proceeded to enforce them on black and brown people only. But that was 50 years ago. Surely we don't do those things anymore. But if we didn't see those things as problematic back then, what things are we doing now that we will look back on and see as completely against the value systems we say we espouse? Suggestions that come to mind: voter suppression of communities of color continues on a grand scale. People of color continue to be disproportionately imprisoned by a rigged justice system. A list of people of color who die at the hands of police continues to grow unabated. And those are just the already obvious ones. So, if you think civil rights was back then and not now, think again. It's time we told the history of the civil rights movement not as quaint old stories about a long ago past, but as a call to action in a difficult present. The myth about that era is that it was a glorious time, that America was moving towards something great, all is one, as America always does, and that we are already there now, so we can quit. The reality is that it was a hard time, that we were divided then much as we are now, and that as far as we have come, America is still rife with entrenched systems of oppression and injustice that need our attention and need our commitment and need our courage to change them. As a new administration begins to take shape after the recent election, there is celebration and euphoria in some quarters, anger and depression in others. Whichever side you are on, the work begins now to reach out across the deep divides, to re-examine the myths about who we have been in the past and who we are now, and to begin today to act as though we are all Americans in these once again united states. So may it be. Our hymn is "There Is More Love Somewhere," first verse only.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on until I find it. There is more love somewhere.
And now a benediction from Langston Hughes. Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic wreath, but opportunity is real and life is free, equality in the air we breathe. Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Go in peace, walk softly on your paths, and may the light of love shine on you all your days.